want to thank AMCA and A2K for the 8-year relationship, doing great work. Today, we're going to be talking about a project that started 5 years ago, actually. And Ian will walk through the details of that. I was pretty much doomed to this business. My grandfather was an electrical engineer. Actually worked on the first transistors in the 40s in the Navy. My father was chief mechanical at Skidmore, Owings and Merrill for 41 years. So I think Elaine had a picture of SOM in 1968. My dad got there in 67. And interestingly enough, when he retired, his last major project was Burj Khalifa, so twice as tall as the Sears Tower. For myself, I'm an electrical engineer. I started the company in 1989 in my dorm room. The original vision of that was to help the AEC market use technology instead of always shunning it. Nothing's really changed today, 30 years later. Today we work in the whole life cycle, one of the few companies in the world. We sell to designers, subs, GCs, manufacturers, and owners. So, the issues that have, been talked about at this conference is something obviously we've been fighting through for a while. On my short trip here, I got to read the VBiz documentation, and it kind of lines up to this case study that we did, because it's about, and I think in Elaine's presentation it's the same, if data is not going to clearly pass through the life cycle, we're just going to get nowhere on that side. So I thought the VBiz was excellent, because again, I think it addresses that issue that we're using stuff that was set 25 years ago, 5 parameters, and we just have more data than that. So we should be using more. So originally, we were going to have someone from Mercy, so they couldn't make it. So I'm going to hand over the presentation a little bit to Ian, and you're in good hands there because he's been there for 5+ years. He's the curator of that project. So we'll do that. So hopefully from this, you'll see that how you can pass the data and what kind of, how the process can be tweaked. We talk about, we know the process needs to be changed. We know how difficult that is, and to get owners to change that is even more difficult. So, but obviously, when we started this project, as many technology projects where you're going to do something different, you have to take a lot of risk on yourself. And so originally, when we went to Mercy, the thing that we had seen in the market was that obviously owners were not using the data. So we were doing, we had design drawings, we were redoing the fabrication drawings, and the difference of those two, could be 70%. And no one was using the data. So Mercy, who has it's just like $4.5 billion revenue, they were using BIM. So they had models. They had just done almost $1 billion hospital and used nothing on that. So we had created a plan where we offered to Mercy where we would create a lifecycle execution plan, and we would actually watch the project throughout with data and certifying it and federating the model and promising to give the data to whatever product at that time. Obviously, we knew it was going to be years. Whatever that product was going to be, we would send the data there. So we started, and one of the things that we changed here in stage 1 in isolating the models was that we actually had more responsibility on the design side and coordination to make sure that the design was going to be closer to construction, because that's one of the issues in the business too. If there's such a difference in those two models, it's too expensive on the federation, and therefore the owner's going to have a tough time. So we took that and we built content on the project that was matched to what Mercy needed at the end of the job, and made sure that that all stayed linked and it was correct, even through federation. And then now, 5 years later, they use a platform that Ian can talk about, and we transferred the data. So it was very interesting, and we have to do that in the future. And I think like the VBiz, that's what you have to address, obviously data, but the problem in the life cycle is as soon as you hit those hurdles, we're all stuck. So the exciting part is that we know there's tools in the whole life cycle that are excellent. And, FM and operations is slow because many of those products don't tie to a model. And let's face it, not all the data is in models. So you have to come from a couple sides and isolate that data. So it's funny, we did a survey on LinkedIn, and to this point, and is BIM becoming complicated? There's 30%, see what you will in that. Is it cost effective? Most people thought so. But this next slide is interesting. Are we delivering to owners efficiently? Doesn't look good. And I think at dinner Wednesday, we were talking about this issue that for disruptors coming in and stealing what we do, it's not really too hard to sneak in that 99% right there. So again, I think we have to stay diligent on there, change what we do, and make sure the lifecycle data stays true. Just a little background about Mercy. They're a progressive hospital. They created a virtual hospital, and obviously for them they were committed to technology. But from the owner side, as they were changing, obviously there's someone that came from CAD and like any other group, but they were willing to take a chance on changing things. They're in the 4 corner states in the U.S. 40,000 employees, 4.6 billion, and 23 million square feet of space that they take care of. So quite a lot of stuff to look at. They had an internal challenge to save 30% overall, and that was the whole reason of attempting to change it up, because they were aggressive in saving 10% in design construction, 10% on speed, and 10% of operational cost reduction. So I'm going to hand it to Ian at this point. Again, I thank the AMCA. Hopefully next year, some more things we got to keep diligent on keeping data and changing the process. Thank you.
All right, good morning, everyone. So we'll be talking about 2 major different pieces. The first is going to be ILM, or Integrated Lifecycle Management. ILM, the easy way to think about this is, if I can find the right button, basically from the owner's perspective. How are they dealing with the data? How are they working with it? How are they gaining analytics, right? Now, how are they pushing that back into the building, right? And so we started there with Mercy before we even started on the case study projects that we'll talk about. And so when we first started speaking with Mercy, we identified a few separate strategic issues. And some of those, the biggest one here, and it's been mentioned both this morning and yesterday certainly, has been the siloed approach and the number of silos that, these different owners have, right? And so we also found, because of that siloed approach, that there was a lot of duplication of data and data entry as well, right? So there were also 5 different enterprise asset management platforms within Mercy alone. So we started looking at the different possibilities, right? And what we were targeting were to integrate one singular IWMS, or integrated work management system, right? To start to bring together these different departments, these different divisions. And what we found was, the past few days here, we've been talking about kind of this bottom-led change, right? We in the industry have to kind of push that up to the owners. Well, what we've actually found is that that also has to come top down. You have to have an owner that's willing to do this and roll the dice, that's crazy enough to say, yeah, I want to do something different, right? So what we did after we kind of identified these problems was we spent about 3 years going through a discovery, creating requirements, identifying challenges, and the 6 different divisions that we looked at were PD&C, Planning, Design, and Construction, Facilities Management, Real Estate, Clinical Engineering, also known as HTM, you'll hear that here in a minute, MTS, which is their IT division, okay? And so we were looking at how all of these were using data and exchanging it, right? And we're not looking at just asset data, right? So who is the manufacturer of a pump? But we were looking at, what is that spatial volume? What is it used for? Who is assigned to that space, right? So in terms of the integrated lifecycle management implementation process, once we had the requirements, we created an RFQ and put it out to 25 of the top IWMS platforms that we felt hit 90+% of the requirements we had gathered during the discovery phase. We whittled that down to a 5 vendor shortlist, and eventually we got down to a single vendor. That vendor was Nuvolo, and they're a cloud-based platform that allows the interaction of data very quickly and very easily as compared to some of the older IWMS platforms that are available for us. And so,
yeah, my name is Steve Kopis from St. Louis, Missouri. Currently work with Mercy Planning, Design, and Construction, technology manager. So one of the things that we did early on was we noticed that there was a break in each department on how they do things through processes and workflows. And we found that it was crucial for our IT and facilities teams to come together and break down the silos. One of the things was that we wanted to follow was trying to utilize a single data model to eliminate overlap. We can modernize a single system engagement and utilize a single tool across the platform to standardize and develop our data. We found that in facilities, real estate, HTM, and planning, design, and construction, they all did it in various ways within their own methods. And looking at software applications holistically, we started to vet that process and see if there was an application that could have a single data point. We found that application was actually Nuvolo, a company that's a startup company that kind of came out of nowhere. And the beauty of it was that we already had an embedded ServiceNow environment with our IT folks that they had just went ahead and developed a couple of years before this process of looking for an application that would interact with our facilities, real estate, PD&C, and healthcare technology management group. The big things that we had to do early on was to develop collaboration between the groups and line ourselves in a singular method instead of having so much of a this is how we do, this is what we do type of process internally to their own department. So one of the things that they had asked me was to be the product owner and develop the means and the ways to start finding out how can we bring these departments together and eliminate that siloed approach. So early on, what we did was we selected Nuvolo. We knew it was a native application that could sit on top of ServiceNow. So using those 3 to 4 departments, we knew that we can interlock and sit in the world of IT and lay on top of their environment. So as we started to choose Nuvolo, we also had to build a requirement set for each department to make sure that whatever data we were going to extract would have a direct implication into the other departments. So that is where we had to go into discovery mode quite a bit and have a lot of discovery calls and break down.
Okay, so Steve is talking about the overall process that we went through, and Steve and I worked very, very closely throughout the entire requirement creation phase. We actually, and if you're not familiar with ServiceNow, it's an ITSM platform or IT service management platform. So it's really made for managing servers and IT infrastructure. And so Nuvolo plugs in right on top of that. And so I typically liken it to something like Salesforce and how you have an app ecosystem, how it plugs into that. But once we were kind of down the road and implementing Nuvolo in this ILM process, we also, in conjunction, started to look at the project management processes in design, construction, and then looking how we can bridge the gap between design and construction and operations. And we dubbed that enhanced integration. We actually have worked through 6 different pilot projects, and so we'll talk about 2 of those. Each one of these pilot projects has been vastly different in both scope as well as process, because what we're trying to do is sort of break the mold with the different project teams in terms of how this data is created, how it's collected, and how it's delivered. So there's no right answer for any of these things yet. We're getting closer to it though, okay? So what is ILM, right? Effectively, it's a phased approach that allows us to use a lifecycle execution plan. And I'll tell you, our first execution plan on the Mercy Hospital Jefferson was about 65 pages. We've now whittled that down to about 15. So it's a lot easier to digest. And there's still a great amount of data in it, or information in it. But one of the things that we started doing, which Mercy certainly did not have, was to develop a data standard very similar to what the VBIZ has come through and started to define, not only with the asset properties, but also the naming, which is really important, especially when Mercy has nearly 30 million square feet that they need to manage, right? So we have to make sure that all of our naming, regardless of which facility they're looking at, they're able to understand exactly what pump or air handler or VAV box they're looking at. So some of the tactical problems that we identified very quickly from some of their previous projects, and we were talking with some of the previous project teams to see how those projects had gone. The biggest thing was there was a massive rift and disconnect between the design as well as the construction teams, right? Which certainly provided some cost issues and many RFI issues as well. There was really a lack of transparency from the point of Mercy's project managers. They really had no idea what was going on during the design and construction process, right? They would certainly have owner and operator meetings during the project process, but they were really only told what they wanted to hear, right? And that everything was going fine, right? And then the biggest point I think on here as well was the 3D models that were being generated were completely being recreated at each step, right? Which was mentioned earlier today. So this is a quote that I like here is, you know, to have a core principle, everything else is just tactics, right? So how did we improve these things, right? Well, of course, we created the execution plan, but there was a lot of education that we had to do as well. So we went through and we met with each project team individually, then we started to bring everybody into a big room similar to this. And we started to talk about, okay, what are our goals? How are we going to get there? And it was a very collaborative process, and we actually brought in the subcontractors at about 50% design development, which is very atypical, especially for a hospital project in this size and scope. And then, of course, we focused on the end, right? We always start to begin, or now we're starting to begin thinking about the end first, right? Where are we going? So to talk a little bit about how we broke down these silos and how we engaged many of these different stakeholders, Steve will come tell us again about how we were able to break some of those barriers.
Let's use healthcare technology management, clinical engineering, biomed. They all go by different terms. We really noticed that the whole group was affected by this, all the way from admins to management to technicians to operations coordinators. They lived a lifestyle that they were used to the same things, but breaking down these new ways and explaining and educating these folks on these new processes was a little bit daunting to them. Folks weren't always open to wanting to try something new, but with the guidance of a strong leadership and a vision, that really helped out the process through the implementation. Now, granted, people will say that, this application, it was easy, it was friendly, and user-friendly, going in there and just doing a simple task was easy, but now the learning curve is raised. People know that they need to push themselves to come out of a system that they've known for 10, 15, 20 years, some of them, and to be pushed into something that was totally different to them. It really, it was a challenge, and the ways that we saw to help these folks were we set up 3 different types of training. And that was one was UAT, video mandatory training, and instructor-led training. So we looked at 3 ways to train these folks. But still, as we went into production and we went into go live, those folks still needed help and assistance. So we sat on a command center line for about 7 to 8 days, just getting through the bumps in the road. And I think over time, people embraced it.
So to recap a little bit what Steve said, of course he was focusing on the educational piece here at the bottom, but I think that the most important pieces here were that we were trying to explain to everybody that we were trying to improve not only the employee efficiency, but also the operational efficiency, right? And once we started to explain that, people really started to dig in, and we kind of got through the trough of disillusionment, right? And so this, just as a quick graph to kind of show where we started 5.5 years ago, roughly, everybody was uncertain. No one really believed that we could actually do this and pass the design and construction data directly into operations. We started to have more conversations, and people got kind of skeptical. And this trough really doesn't do it justice, because it really should go off the page, right? We hit a point, it was about 2.5 years ago now, that we started asking ourselves, well, are we actually doing the right things, right? Should we stop this and reevaluate everything, or should we just crack on? And well, we decided to just keep moving forward with the process that we had set up. We had faith that it was going to work out, and we were right. We started to come back up. People started to see how we were able to use this information as we were providing that transparency through the pilot projects, and they started to get really excited about it. And then we started to hit that commitment point there, right? And it really took off. So in terms of some of the technology that we utilized for these pilot projects, and actually, there we go. some of the benefits that we got from them, of course, we increased collaboration between project teams. We were able to, again, provide transparency to the owner. We were able to maximize the budget as well as the time allotted. And we were able to fast track all 6 of these projects as well. So some of the other technologies that we utilized, one of them was augmented reality and virtual reality. What we were doing with those is, about midway through design, we were taking our models, our BIM, and we were throwing them into the Oculus Rift or the HTC Vive, and we were actually bringing the doctors and the nurses and the stakeholders into these great environments so that they could tell us whether the spaces that we were being designed were accurate and usable for them, right? So a couple of the things that we were able to find out very quickly were that some of the finishes were off. We found that some of the nurse stations were way too small, that the nurses would have been bumping into each other, and things like that. Some of the technologies that we implemented during the construction process, right? We implemented a few different safety features. We started using drone scanning as well to compare how often or how far the construction was, right? And comparing that back to our models, both in Navisworks and Revisto. And then we were using a couple of different asset data technologies as well. The most notable being that we actually had to build an asset data collector for the general contractor as well as the subcontractors to input the installation data of the mechanical pieces of equipment, the electrical pieces, as well as the spaces. One of the things that we were doing prior to enclosing all the spaces too is we were actually capturing 360-degree photos of every space and linking that back together for a walkthrough for the facility managers, right? Many facility managers are a little older and they don't necessarily want to have to navigate through a model, but they can certainly click through a series of pictures and kind of navigate that walkthrough. And so that was our kind of workaround there. We certainly still provided all the models at the end, but we wanted to make it as easy as possible for as many people to utilize this information as possible. So specific to the platforms that we leveraged, we of course were using BIM 360 Design. Now this project kicked off in 2015, so it was still called C4R then, and it had just graduated from Project Skyscraper. Of course we used Navisworks to coordinate all the way from design through construction. And actually, because we brought the contractors in early, they were actually providing fabrication level information into our designs. So at the end of design, we almost had a fabrication ready set. It was very close. Of course, we utilized Revisto, and we use that mainly for our issue tracking. Excuse me, and if you haven't seen Revisto, I strongly recommend to go chat with the guys out there because it really does help, and I have a video here, I'll show you how that works. And then we used Smartsheet a little bit as well to start to aggregate some of this information, again, providing transparency. You know, we all work in Excel, and Smartsheet is just an online version of that, right? And then of course, we utilize Dynamo to ultimately push and pull the data back into our BIM. So some of the ROI gains that we saw by going through these processes were, of course, being able to reduce cost, integrate multiple different systems, and as well as increase performance. So this is a quick video of a few different technologies that we used on the Mercy Hospital Jefferson. So of course we scanned the existing central utility plant here. Then we jump into Navis. And this is Revisto, where we're overlaying a floor plan on top of the model, and we're able to section that up and down. And one of the great things about Revisto, other than it can go right to VR as well, is that any one of these sections that are cut inside of Revit align directly to the model and allow anybody to section it down and to be able to see exactly the detail level that's in the model, right? Because we were really targeting a level 400 at the end of design, right? Now in certain areas we hit it and some we didn't. We did a couple of nice little walkthroughs, and this is an example of some drone fly-throughs and some site scanning here. And so in this project, we redid the main entryway as well as added a 4-story bed tower off to the right there. Again, we're back into Revisto. Excuse me. Now, I really wish that I had some actual pictures here of the entryway as we're going through this walkthrough, because this is exactly what the entryway of the hospital looks like. Our rendering team really did a bang-up job of this. And then, of course, we jump back into some drone flying around here and things like that. So we really had a lot of challenges in this project specifically because of the existing conditions and then connecting that to a brand new bed tower as well. So we did a lot of scanning, a lot of visualization on this project. Okay. So a little bit more specifically about this project. It was about a $600 million project. It was a 4-story bed tower. It was also renovations of the main entryway, oncology, cardiology, as well as the labor and delivery centers. And we did a little bit in the central utility plant as well as where we started. So our next slide here, Steve is going to talk about some of the lessons learned that we garnered from sort of a combination of the integrated lifecycle management as well as the enhanced integration.
I would say lessons learned is work with one department specifically, identify their issues and needs, and develop those processes early, get through their development, move forward with that project, and then move on to the next. We did also understand that location data would probably be a lot more important in the beginning. So starting with healthcare technology management was probably not the smartest of things to do. I will also state that developing the relationships and taking applications away from folks, thinking that they're happy with what they have has always been a struggle, and having a key sponsor and a key leader to enforce that is really critical to the project. So anytime you can sit down and have a strong relationship with your leader as being a product owner on this project, you can help create that division or break down that division.
So fast forwarding, our first project, our first pilot, was the Mercy Hospital Jefferson. Our last or most recent pilot has been the Mercy Northwest Arkansas bed tower addition. And so this is a much larger project. This was about $850 million project. It's an 8-story bed tower addition as well as a full renovation of the existing hospital. And so again, we had a lot of the same challenges in terms of connecting existing systems to new systems. We also had a very similar project team going through this project. So that really helped because we didn't have to do as much education. And we were actually able to deliver this project 6 months ahead of schedule so that Mercy was able to start making a lot more money very quickly. So in terms of what we did to this schedule, our typical schedule, or typical design bid build schedule, is above in green here, and our kind of enhanced integration project schedule is there in blue. And the dotted lines there, that's our substantial completion line, okay? And so we were actually able to turn over all of our operations and maintenance data, all of the spatial data, all of the asset information at effectively day 0 in our enhanced integration projects. In terms of some of the numbers for these things, right? And specific to the Mercy Hospital Jefferson, and Chris mentioned the 30% challenge from Mercy. In green here, we predicted that we were going to save roughly 6.7% on the design and construction process. So it's not quite the 10% that Mercy wanted on the first project, but we actually hit a 5.1% savings, which is in our blue column here. And a lot of those savings came from, being more efficient, using C4R or BIM 360 design and the tools that are available for us, as well as mapping the underground utilities. That was a big thing for us because these buildings were very old. They had been around for about 60 or 70 years, and no one knew what was really underground. So we used a lot of LiDAR for that. In terms of looking at the ROI from the operational perspective, and again, we wanted to hit a 10% savings, right? So basically, the Jefferson project was about 700,000 square feet, of renovated and new space, and we were able to target a 6.75% ROI on the operational savings, right? So that was about a half a year payback period that we saw just on the Jefferson project. So we've tuned these numbers a bit, and we've gotten a bit closer on the Rogers project to that 10% across both of those options. So I'll leave you all with just a few different thoughts here. So one of the things that we've found is that a lot of our generations are starting to move out. We're starting to bring in a lot of younger people, and they all want this technology. They all want sort of a push button mentality, right? And so I think we have to start thinking about that and how we utilize this data and the platforms and the tools that are available for us. The second thing I'll leave us with is begin with the end in mind. And I already mentioned that, but if we don't know where we're going, we don't have a path forward, right? And so that's really where we want to leave this and start thinking about the future. Thanks very much for having us.